Welcome back into Talking Points. Donald Trump made a big selection for his cabinet last week, appointing Linda McMahon as Secretary of Education. I believe we have a photo of Linda McMahon to take a look at here. She used to run the Small Business Administration for Trump, and if you recognize that last name, it's because she is the spouse of Vince McMahon, who the two of them ran the WWE. A little educational fun fact for you, Jake. Donald Trump is the only U.S. president who is in the WWE Hall of Fame.
Wow.
Yeah, but McMahon has no teaching experience, which will mark the second time Trump has picked someone without any teaching experience to run the Department of Education. His last education secretary was Betsy DeVos. They both came into office pledging to abolish the Department of Education. That obviously didn't happen during Trump's first term, but could happen this time around, Jake.
Could happen this time around. No teaching experience. She did have a little bit of experience running the education department in Connecticut, which she resigned within a year of receiving because she didn't have teaching experience. But like you mentioned, they've done this big talk about abolishing the Department of Education. This has become more and more of a hot button issue over the last 4 years. We've seen fights for parental rights, which we're still not sure exactly what that means. Is that making principals political appointees? Is that having more influence in the school board? We're not sure. But like I said, this has become a hot button issue, and there's a lot of things that Trump has said that he's going to do with the Department of Education. We're not really sure if he's going to be able to do them. But one thing that I want to point out is he really wants to give power back to the states on the Department of Education. He said that he's going to allow states to bring back school prayer in public school, something that we have not done in public school because it's public school and this country was built on the separation of church and state. He's talked about supporting school choice, which you'd have to imagine would have huge legal battles in the Supreme Court, and this court that is now a heavily conservative majority could go the way of school choice advocates on that, something that we haven't seen since the early 2000s with those Chanin and Bollock battles in the Supreme Court that were so famous, and those experiments in Cleveland and Milwaukee on school choice. He's talked about pulling federal funding from schools that teach critical race theory, something that has spread across the United States and would affect a lot of schools. He's talked about, I want to go back to this, parental rights, which again, we're still not sure exactly what that means. Do they want to make principals political appointees? We're not sure, right? Yeah. Is it giving parents more choice over the school board, which they can already vote for? It's a lot of things that he's said. Now it's going to be interesting to see how McMahon implements many of these things that he's said he's going to do.
I think for folks who aren't familiar, the idea of school choice might be, like, it sounds like a really good idea, maybe, in principle. It's kind of like the pro-choice versus pro-life argument. Well, I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-life, I love life, like whatever. But when you actually look at the policies of what these things are about, school choice is about taking money out of public schools and sending it towards private schools, some of them that have a more religious bent to them, which again is not something that everybody would support. And when we look at folks who are leading the front edge of putting Bibles in the classroom, putting prayer back in school, leading the way on school choice, I think of someone like Ryan Walters, who's the superintendent of education out of Oklahoma. He's been pushed very hard for his pretty radical views in terms of putting religion into public school classrooms, including by CNN's Pamela Brown. I want to take a look at some of their exchange.
Thousands of people, including parents who signed a petition to impeach you with more than 14,000 signatures at last check, say this is government overreach. And where is your authority coming from to enforce this prayer video to be played in schools?
I appreciate you pushing that left-wing narrative here, but here's the reality.
It's not a left-wing narrative. I'm literally talking about a petition that parents have signed that's gotten more than 14,000 signatures that have raised this issue.
Pretty clear on religious liberty. The Constitution's crystal clear on religious liberty. I know the left doesn't want our kids to know anything about the role the Bible played in American history. They don't want any of our kids to know about the Constitution. Our religious liberties are protected, and the left has driven the Bible out of schools, driven prayer out of schools, and everything in education's gotten worse since.
And Walters has said that he wants his actions to act as kind of a roadmap for Secretary McMahon moving into the future. One more thing that he has done when he talks about putting Bibles in classrooms, he's referring specifically to the Trump Bibles, the $60 God Bless the USA Bibles, which also include copies of the Constitution and Lee Greenwood's song, God Bless the USA.
Yeah, and Walters, of course, providing no constitutional evidence for why that belongs in schools, because the Constitution says that church and state should be separate. And I think it's interesting that he might provide a roadmap for something like this. But one quick point I want to get in before we finish up on this is we've seen abortion become a referendum issue in so many of these states because they sent it back to the states. Yeah. When school choice was a big issue, they did a lot of these referendums in cities. They did them in states. They were like, you decide if school choice is what it's going to be. They've made this such a social issue. It might be interesting to see that if something happens in this heavily conservative court, they send it back to the states and it becomes one of those referendum issues. I think that'd be something that's really important to watch going into the 2026 midterms.
Absolutely. Too bad we only have an hour. I feel like we could talk a lot.